This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Woo!
Let's go get our yayas out, y'all. Welcome to the X-Cast. The truth is in here. I'm your host, Sarah Blair, and today I am joined by Carl Sweeney and Tony Black. Hey, guys.
Hello, Sarah. Hello, Tony. Glad to be with you. Fascinating episode today, so I'm glad we're all here as a trio.
Bring it on.
Good to have Tony back.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be back.
Black is back.
Black is back. And and you know, it's quite nice to be doing one of the worst episodes of the X-Files for once. That's a nice thing to be doing. I'm quite pleased.
Only the best for the worst.
You flatter me.
That's why we got you, Tony. All right, so today we're talking about first-person shooter. Yeah, it's going to be a good talk, I think. We're going to have fun with this. This episode originally aired on February 27th in the year 2000. This is the 13th episode of Season 7, and it was written by William Gibson and Tom Maddox.
Yeah. Kill Switch writers, of course, in the second episode.
Yes, yes. And it was directed by Chris Carter, who did a commentary on the DVD series. So
Indeed he did.
We're going to talk a little bit about that, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
So this episode is about... What is this episode about? I don't know. I didn't watch it.
I've watched it and I'm still not sure, to be honest. Marlo, this is the virtual world, isn't it? This is Maitreya, and it's, cutting-edge video game technology.
It's about a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff happens in this episode. There's some shooting.
Yeah, a bunch of dudes go in there to play, go on a Star Trek holodeck, essentially, and, start getting slaughtered by a sexy video game character. That's it, basically. And then Mulder turns into a bit of a slightly dodgy misogynist at points, and, Scully just thinks, what am I doing in this show, guys? And things like that. Basically.
I thought you liked this episode, Tony. I thought that was the vibe you were giving me. Right. I've seen you give out online. So I'm surprised to hear you come out straight off the bat and say this is one of the worst episodes of the series, etc.
So, this comes from a post on the basement where Ellie Butler said that she quite liked it despite the fact it's not very good. And I agreed. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of how I feel. And that is how I feel. I know full well this is shite. Right, complete shite. Okay, it really is. It's really bad. It's one of the worst episodes of season 7, at very least. We're not talking like Excelsis Day levels of terrible. There are layers with the X-Files. I don't even think it's Tesso dos Picos levels of terrible, but it's pretty bad. But I don't know why I've always had a bit of a soft spot for this. I still kind of do, even though I think now, with age, it's really not aging well. And the more I watch it, the further away from 2000 we get, the more I can see, some of this just is a bit dodgy and a bit dated. I don't know what it is about it I quite like. Maybe I will figure that out as we go.
Maybe.
I can't really answer it in a way.
No, I mean, it's one of those things. It's not quite what you're saying, but one of the things that is a real privilege for us who work on the X-Cast is, you see these episodes. Sometimes you forget about a particular episode and you go back and you think, this is more fun than I remembered. This is pretty enjoyable stuff. Now, to be clear, I did not have that experience with first-person shooter whatsoever. This is not a good episode at all, in my opinion. I don't think it's well written. I don't think it's got any insight into this subject matter. It just can't land on a tone that is appropriate or consistent. I don't like what it does with the characters. It makes me cringe regularly. It gives me a headache because it's so loud. It's very repetitive as well. I think it's possibly a bigger problem because the things it repeats are not that interesting in the first place. If I was someone who was, I don't really tend to take offence at TV programmes and things like that, but I think, if I was someone who did, I would find this one very insulting, I think, because it's got some very, simplistic stereotypes, things like that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of these things, though, they could be forgiven, but it's not even effective on a surface level for me. It doesn't generate any tension. I don't like the visuals. I think it is worse than those episodes you mentioned, to be honest. I think it's one of the worst episodes the series ever did. I think it's worse than Excelsis Day, Tessa Does Bit Joss, all those things.
Is it?
I think it is
worse than Fight Club? I think it is.
Well, I'm going to give this a 2 out of 10, and the reason it's a 2 is I need to leave some wriggle room for the end of the season, potentially. That's a good question. I haven't seen Fight Club in a little while, to be honest. Sarah, what about you?
Okay, but listen. Okay, so we all have the episodes that we know are terrible, but that we love anyway, and Fight Club is my terrible love episode. You know this. So I'm going to defend Fight Club later with Kurt, but yeah. So I know how you feel right now, Tony.
Yeah,
I can empathize with you.
This isn't my terrible, but I love it. I'd say this is terrible, but I kind of like it. So
I would say Babylon is my episode like that, where I can see the criticisms of it, but I find there are things that I genuinely enjoy. I just don't enjoy this. I find it. I've watched it twice. I watched it once this week, and then again with the Chris Carter commentary. There's just nothing there that appeals to me, really, I've got to say.
Yeah, it's very low on the watchable scale. There are almost all of the episodes of The X-Files that I would rather watch than this one.
What's your score then, Sarah, out of 10?
Probably a 2 at the most.
Yeah.
That's being generous, but lower, probably.
So, Sarah, as someone who podcasts in a hyper-masculine environment, did you empathise with the character of Phoebe?
I kind of do, because, not in the way that she, I don't agree with, how she made the character, but I do, because I wrote a character who is a goddess. I literally wrote a novel series with a character who is a goddess, so I get it. I understand her desire to create this character, and I can get the appeal of the character. I just don't know why she had to put her in this strappy leather thongy thing when she designed it. She had control over how she was designed and what she looks like, and why does she look like that? Why does she look like a dude designed her? I don't understand that part of it. But maybe just because I would have designed her differently, maybe that's what she's into, and that's totally cool. So maybe I don't know. But that didn't make sense to me. But, I would have, I don't know why she wants to, it's just, this episode is just so bad.
Well, I'm going to go for about a 4 out of 10. I'm going to go slightly lower than you guys.
Yeah,
all right, yeah. And I don't tend to score under 5 very often, really. I often find I'm not doing that with X-Files. So it's not good. But yeah, I'll go slightly higher, I think. Which means I'm the worst person of all three of us. Objectively, I'm a worse human being because I've given it more score than you guys.
You may well be, but I don't. It's because there have been people online this week who've been saying, "Oh, this is one of my favourite episodes," etc., etc. They really love it.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, because I posted something sarcastic yesterday for the. It was as we record. It was the 28th anniversary of the X-Files pilot debuting.
Yeah.
And I said I was celebrate. I put the word "celebrate" in quotation marks by watching first-person shooter. But no, I had a few people reply to me, and some people were empathising with me that I was watching it. But there were some people who really dig it. So no, I don't think it's a moral judgment on someone for getting enjoyment out of it, to be fair. Yeah. And I think there are different ways of taking it. The thing with Maitreya and Scully going into the game and stuff. Yeah, I see it a particular way, but I think I can see why some people might find that appealing, potentially. So no, don't worry, Tony. It's
thank you.
It's other things that make you a terrible person, not liking this episode.
I appreciate that, Carl. That's the nicest backhanded compliment you've ever given me. No, you're not a terrible person. Because
it's you could argue that it's quite a sexist episode, but it doesn't mean the people who enjoy it are sexist. Is the point?
No, exactly. Yeah. And to be fair, I think as I was watching it, I was thinking, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but I was thinking about how that you might be able to read this on some level as not as potentially taking a glance at the misogyny of this kind of world. And I think there are some points in it, in this episode, where that is what they're trying to do. I just think they ham-fist it, really, in many ways.
It's the execution, isn't it,
yeah,
I think?
It's just not there. So, yeah, I think there is salvageable stuff, but we'll get there.
It's quite striking as well that it's a Chris Carter-directed episode, isn't it? Because it's kind of a outlier in terms of, you know, he's taken the Gibson-Maddox script. How much has been rewritten, I don't know. But it's kind of not quite the experimental Carter of, like, Postmodern Prometheus triangle.
No. Yeah.
In some ways it could have been with this kind of subject matter, but it's kind of in between. So
I don't think they had the money. Like, I think they didn't have a lot of money for this, I don't think. Like, considering it was quite a effects-heavy, you know, high-concept episode, it looked a bit cheap. You know, not like with Triangle and some of these other things. I think he had to do it on the cheap, and I think it kind of shows now, especially nowadays.
Well, yeah, because you have that warehouse environment where the game is housed.
And they can only really afford, like, two really basic crap sort of holodeck sets.
The Wild West.
The underground bit and the alley. That's, you know, there's not much to it, considering it's this big open world digital environment. I'm like, well, there's only 2 bits. You know, so... Have
you guys ever played laser tag?
Yes, I think Laser Quest is what I know it as, but it's the same thing. Yeah, you put on the thing and you get the gun. Yeah.
I remember that was really huge around this time, or right before.
Still is, really.
But I mean, even that had an interesting gaming. Like, there was a lot going on. You could hide behind stuff. You could go do things. Yeah. It wasn't just like a straight up.
It wasn't just like stand there and shoot.
Yeah. I mean, if there's anything in real life to compare this to, I feel like that would be it, and this is not that at all.
No, I was thinking that, because you think of it as like the video game episode, and there's some commentary in the episode on like the effects of violent video games, and again, very ham-fisted commentary that has no real insight. But then the game itself is not really what they're talking about, is it? The game is, like you say, it's like Laser Quest, or, you know, they could have had the same discussion about the violent effects of playing paintball or something. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So I feel like it's a bit of a missed opportunity in that respect. Like, maybe if they had actually engaged with the idea of like popular video games, now that would have been a tricky thing to do as an X-File, but maybe you could have found a way to do it. But do you know what I mean, Tony? Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah. No, definitely. It's all just trying to sort of get at a particular interesting subgenre that is popular, and in many ways still is popular. But it doesn't really know how to fully execute it, and it could have been really good. I think this could have been really, really good if they'd have got it right. I think if they'd have tethered it much more closely to something we recognise and understand, as opposed to more of an ephemeral idea of the digital environment, that
very generalised
idea based on, you know, the popularity of stuff like, you know, first-person shooter games of the time, like particularly Doom and that kind of stuff, that in the 90s and into the noughties was huge among gamers. And then they're trying to transpose that into, the futuristic, I guess, post-Matrix idea. 'Cause the Matrix had come out like a couple of months beforehand. The post-sort of Matrix idea of a digital virtual world. And you know, now you're starting to see a lot more of that when they're creating like PlayStation VR and Google Glass and all this kind of stuff that is coming soon. I mean, this will be the decade where that stuff probably really takes off. So I'm not saying first-person shooters ahead of its time, because I really don't think it is, but I think it was definitely trying to sort of place the where the video games were in terms of the cultural sort of consciousness of that time, and try and port it ahead a bit into a future that they probably knew was coming. And the problem is it has dated, and it doesn't really feel like that they were tapping into something that actually will exist. It's too general, and I don't think it works.
And they don't really get into things like, you know, issues of sentience or reality that the concept kind of could allow for, do they? Because like even in terms of it not being ahead of its time, but like in the last couple of months, the Ryan Reynolds film Free Guy, for instance, where he's kind of a background player in a video game who becomes aware of that, and it's actually quite a fun film. But there's quite a missed opportunity then here with the character of Maitreya, who never really develops beyond the surface level, does she? So
No. And I misremembered it because I thought that's exactly what happened. But I think I was conflating this and, the AI from Killswitch. And, let's be honest, Killswitch is a far better episode than
Much
this
better.
by these two. I mean, so much better. And I think I was conflating the two there in terms of the AI. So yeah, it feels like they sort of they're trying to zone in so much and comment, I think, on this toxic masculinity of the video game world and how, there is some level of exploitation of women involved that they're trying to do too much, I think, in a way, in one episode. And I don't think they ever, and then you've got the lone gunman in there and, all this kind of stuff. And it's a bit like, well, pick a lane, guys. Choose where you're going to go, potentially. And I think they missed I think they should have gone down the Maitreya being more sentient kind of route and make this less of a not even a satirical, but an attempt to sort of portray this gunko machismo in video game culture. Because it just looks cheesy now, and it's just painful, a bit painful to. Well, that final act is painful to watch.
Oh yeah,
it's really bad,
unintentionally bad, hilarious, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
Well, guys, we have low scores for this episode, but can you guess the IMDb rating out of 10?
Ooh, go on, Tony. You go first.
I think this is probably going to be relatively low because I don't know if you've got that many fans of this. Low 7s, 7.1 maybe, something like that.
I think it's going to be lower than that. I think I probably have seen it at some point when I've been recording these episodes, but I can't remember. I think Fight Club must be the lowest. They don't tend to go below a 6. So if Fight Club's like a 6 or a 6.1, this will be a notch higher, I think. This will be like 6.3, something like that.
Well, yes, you are correct, Carl. It is a 6.3.
Is it really? I didn't know that.
That's
Nice.
a good, in quote marks, guess.
Good deduction.
Uh-huh.
Excellent deduction.
Yeah.
Well,
Way to
yeah,
go. And
What is Fight Club lower, Sarah?
Is Fight Club? Yeah, it must be.
yeah, I'm looking, scrolling. It's a 6.1. Yeah.
Right.
Ah, okay. Wow. That must be the lowest rated X-Files episode ever, surely.
Yeah,
is there
I think-
anything lower than that?
I don't know.
You think Babylon, because
Well-
by the time Babylon came along, you had people organised voting by then, didn't you, on IMDb?
Yeah. I'm going to look this up, right? As we talk, I'm
Alpha's
going to
a
look this up.
6.5.
Babylon's a 6.3.
Okay. Tesso, Dos Bichos.
Fearful
Amazing
Symmetry.
how much of season 8. No season 9 episode gets under a 7. That's amazing. Like, how does that happen?
People don't even bother voting on them. They don't like it that much. It's not the highest score.
Probably. Tesso Dos Bichos is a... Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, six. Bang on 6.
There we go.
I think that's the one. That's the word.
Yeah.
That is officially the word. What about Excelsis Day? I can't remember that one. No, that's the 7.1. How is Excelsis Day in the 7s? Come on, guys. 7.1. So, yeah, I think it's Tesso Dos Bichos, yeah, is the worst ever, officially. Which I don't think that's worse. I don't think that's worse than Fight Club. No chance. No way. Anyway.
All right, guys, let's unpack this episode and dig into it. What do you say?
Let's blast the crap out of it.
Okay, so I need to talk about this teaser for a minute because have you guys ever actually watched gaming tournaments? Have you ever watched people play video games? Because this is it is a huge deal.
Yeah.
These gaming tournaments get more views than pretty much any sporting event. Like more than the Super Bowl. I don't know about the World Cup. That's probably a lot. But it's a lot. So many people watch these things.
No, my son is quite a keen YouTube watcher, and this is what he's doing a lot of the time, is watching people play video games. And like, for someone like me, I'm not saying there's a complete age divide on this, because there are gamers of all shapes and sizes and ages, but to someone like me, that wasn't what gaming was about when I was a kid. It was get your mates around your house, plug in your second controller, play Mortal Kombat, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That was just, so that idea of the way he engages with gaming is very different to the way I do. So yeah, it's an odd one, isn't it?
In your experience, do people really act this way when they are about to go play a video game?
Well,
Like,
actually,
sometimes, but
I think video games can cause a tremendous amount of like anger, and I noticed this with my son. Sometimes he's like shouting out from his room and stuff, but it's not like when he logs on, which is what these guys are doing.
yeah.
Like as they enter the game. So yeah, it's kind of like it's so shrill and unsubtle from the get-go, isn't it? Because you got the alarm blaring off, that guy shouting like "gonna kill, gonna kill." There's just no subtlety here whatsoever. So we get the idea,
No.
it's this gaming as this kind of conduit or outlet for aggressive masculine urges, but there's no finesse about it whatsoever.
It does feel intentionally quite heightened, though.
Yeah.
For effect, in that it's all like the episode sort of blasts open. It's like big, like kind of music, and then they're like, go come on. I feel like it's they're intentionally trying to make these guys incredibly annoying and pumped up, and dudes kind of thing. For effect, in a way.
No,
I don't know. I doubt everyone's like this, but I think they're definitely doing that quite intentionally. Yeah.
I think it is for effect, and I think you also see like you got this like quite restless handheld camera and these quick cuts as well, which are trying to give it that sense of urgency and heightenedness. The problem is it gets really annoying really fast. It kind of reminded me of, because later in the episode you get a Basic Instinct homage. And I was thinking
it's so obvious. It's so
I know. I was thinking maybe there's some kind of a comparison with some of Paul Verhoeven, who directed that film, some of his other films like Starship Troopers or something, or Showgirls, where they've got this very overblown style, but it's as a way of almost kind of making a satirical point, or presenting a satirical look at things. The problem here for me is that it's so aggressive that I find it off-putting, and it really stops me getting into the episode.
That's what I had a hard time with. I couldn't understand if it was meant to be satire because they're so overblown with it all that it feels like it should be satire. And if you view it that way, it is kind of funny. But it doesn't make it enjoyable at all. But at least it makes sense in a way.
I think it isn't in a way. I feel like they're trying to do that, but it doesn't actually happen.
Right.
Which is odd, because there are so many episodes of The X-Files that do successfully satirise all kinds of different things. And I can totally see, like I said earlier, I can totally see on one level what this episode is trying to do, but I don't understand why it doesn't actually happen. Why when they get in there's no way, in a way, for the audience to sort of be able to be led towards that conclusion. It just feels like it's a bunch of heightened up dude bros who then get, savagely sort of killed by this sexy woman. And I don't... It's not satire that's so clever enough it's hard to miss. It's just not there. And I don't get it. I just don't understand why.
I think, because satire can be about exaggerating things, but the problem is that in the way they exaggerate this kind of video game milieu, it's done in such a simplistic way, that it's almost like all gamers are like this, all men are like this about certain types of women, And I think Mulder and Scully could have provided us some kind of perspective on that, but instead what it does is have Mulder kind of acting quite dodgily, I think. I suppose we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves there, because the other thing I wanted to say about the teaser is, immediately I think a problem is that this is not an interesting game, even by the standards of the year 2000. Because like...
It's really not. Shit.
No, because I mean, obviously we've said that it's this kind of laser quest type thing, laser tag, but first-person shooter games were much more interesting by then than this game allows. It's just a few years earlier than this. I think we'd had GoldenEye already.
Oh, yeah.
Where,
Halo? When did Halo come out?
I think that might have been later, but... there are other examples as well where, you're starting to get ideas of like stealth and puzzle solving and all this. And this game they're playing, it's a bit like Space Invaders crossed with Laser Quest, isn't it? Because it's just the rows of motorbikes coming towards them.
Yeah.
There's no real interesting dimension to it or anything. No complications that are...
There's no strategy.
Yeah.
And there's no real sense...
People.
Yeah, there's no real sense either of what the world is. It could be sort of dystopic. It could be...
It could be anything.
It could be anything. It could be a bit like Mad Max. It could be... It's not really
There's
defined
no
in any way, is it?
There's no story.
Yeah.
Because like Tony made the point about the holodeck in Star Trek, and I've actually been watching some Star Trek The Next Generation recently, which I haven't mentioned this to Tony, actually. But
You enjoying it?
Yes, I am. I mean, I'm only in the early seasons, which I know are like rough.
God. They're terrible.
Well, I'm just starting to get to the good stuff. I think I've had some good episodes.
Good. But hasn't put you off then? That's
not yet. No, I've been talking to Kurt about it. He's been framing my expectations appropriately. But yeah, so like the Enterprise has this holodeck where you can create any environment, and we've already had a couple of decent episodes where I'm up to where Picard goes into like a 1940s film noir, or Data goes into like a Sherlock Holmes mystery and that kind of thing. You could do pretty much anything, And it didn't seem like those episodes that I've watched of Star Trek were particularly expensive or anything. There were ways to do it. So virtual environments can be much more engaging in a science fiction story than this one is. So I think it's a big hindrance to the episode.
Well, in Star Trek, the holodeck episodes, you just knock up a couple of different sets, really, and that's what they would do. None of those 80s or 90s Star Trek shows ever really went on location very often, and did anything like that. So it's not difficult, to do. In fact, I'm pretty sure I read that this episode actually went over budget as well, trying to get everything done. And I'm a bit like, where did the money go? Like, really? Because there are some effects in there. And at the end, in fact, there's an episode of TNG where it involves the Wild West on the holodeck as well. And at the end of this, they go to like the Wild West, don't they? And it's in a Wild West sort of environment, and you've got things there. But that wasn't that they went to an old abandoned town, was it? In the middle of the desert. Yeah. So, like, I just don't really get it. I don't really get why you couldn't have more, considering you'd had by that point 15 years or so of Star Trek, in particular, doing this kind of virtual world stuff. I don't get why they couldn't. It's not like this is like season 1 of the X-Files and they're on a budget. This season 7. Surely by this point they've got a few quid. It's odd. It's odd.
I never really feel any sense of jeopardy here, even though people are literally dying. And I have found this actually with the holodeck stuff on Star Trek, is there's always some kind of thing where they say, the mortality override has been bypassed or whatever. And it always seems a little bit forced to me. And I felt with this episode, I was never really... We know Mulder and Scully aren't going to die. We know the known gunmen aren't going to die in an episode like this. But I never felt any real sense of tension either, to be honest.
It could be that apparently, according to some of the background... In order to try and keep the cost down, they tried initially to borrow virtual game layouts from video game companies, but they didn't want to just, according to Corey Kaplan, the production designer, copy existing designs. So they created their own layouts, which ironically ended up being more costly. But then it's not there on the screen, is it really? It just is nothing in the end.
And I also wonder, sorry, Sarah, we'll let you come back in a sec, but
please go ahead.
Long-term listeners will remember me saying at one point that I've never seen Doctor Who, and I've been watching some of the rebooted Doctor Who, the Christopher Eccleston episodes.
Right. Okay.
And there's an episode, I think it's the penultimate episode of his run, where they're being held in like these futuristic versions of 2005 reality shows, like Big Brother, Trini and Susanna. The Weakest Link, and like it dates the episode immediately, but in a really fun way. So actually, I think they could have got some joy out of recreating some like thinly veiled versions of like late 90s video games here.
Yeah.
Instead, we get the most bland game imaginable, really.
At least a pea shooter at a carnival game, for Pete's sake. Like, that would at least be interesting.
Duck.
Yeah.
Why didn't they do like a riff on Tomb Raider? Given that the Maitreya looks very Lara Crofty.
Like on steroids. She's like Lara Croft, but like on steroids, isn't she?
Steroids, yeah.
Or like,
but Tomb Raider.
To the max.
Yeah, Tomb Raider had just kicked off and it was huge at this point. So yeah, there's lots of missed opportunities, I think. I mean, maybe they were also worried about the IP thing as well.
Maybe.
In part, in that, I mean, it wasn't as rampant then as it is now with intellectual property, but, maybe they were a bit concerned that they didn't want to get themselves in lawsuits and things like that. I mean, the irony is that when you first see Mulder and Scully, is they have to sign a document, don't they, saying this is the intellectual property, of FPS, and it's quite funny, isn't it? What does Scully say? It's easier to get in the Pentagon or something like that.
That might have been the most realistic
I was going to say
of the whole episode.
Yeah, I think that actually works quite well, because, they've got like the high-tech retinal scans and all of that, and like, that's quite, in a way, I don't want to say this episode is like prescient, but like in its sense of how big a concern video games could be, that has aged relatively well. Scully seems a bit bemused by it, and she's a bit like of a stick in the mud through this whole episode, isn't she? About the subject of computer games.
I love how bemused, she is for the whole thing. I love how she's just there going, you guys are just sad acts. All the way through, you sad bastards. And it's great, really. I feel like we needed that a little bit. But I do think that the IP thing is is a little bit forward leaning in that, you know, it's massive now, isn't it? You know, protection of IP, everyone having to sign NDAs. You know, you've got people like right now we're like 3 months away from the next Spider-Man movie, and everyone out there thinks that all the different Spider-Men from all the different films are going to be in it, and then you've got people like Andrew Garfield and, you know, Tobey Maguire going, no, we're not in it, and I bet they will be, but they have to lie because they've got no non-disclosure agreements and all this stuff. So it's like, it's huge now. So I think it was quite forward thinking that they do that. I agree. It's a nice little touch.
It is a nice touch, but what has aged like really badly is like they're in California, whatever. What's the line, Sarah? Something about silicon meets silicone.
Silicon Valley meets silicone.
Yeah. But then, like, when the lone gunmen come on, and obviously I think we need to talk about whether the lone gunmen are portrayed well here. But
no.
Ferriki's like, do you guys want a... Ferreri says something about a latte. He's like, do you guys want a latte or something? And it's like, mate, you can get lattes literally everywhere in 2021. You can go to Greg's to Baker's and get a latte for like £2. You know what I mean? It's like, but here it's like this exemplar of like Californian sophistication or whatever. It's really funny.
Have you ever had a latte from Greg's though? Can't
maybe once or twice.
Very good.
Well,
can't be very good.
It's cheap and cheerful.
Greg's, Sarah, is like a really, really low end British purveyor of like pies and sausage rolls and cakes. It's like it's crap, really. But just people get it on the run, you know.
Yeah.
So,
I like it.
Just I'm familiar with the bar, but without the art. Yeah, spa. That was very confusing for me when I first went because I think of a spa as a place you go to relax and get massages. And everybody was like, I got it at the spa. And I was like, where's the spa that you're getting butter at?
Yeah, I got some pepperami from the spas. What?
Yeah. So
you probably can get lattes in spas these days. I don't know.
Probably.
You probably get like, you know, the machines and
capitalism.
Speaking of capitalism, Sarah, the lone gunmen, do they strike you as the kind of people who would be really interested in like stock options, that kind of thing?
No.
How did you feel about that?
No, oh man. It's just, this is all, everybody is so out of character.
Yes.
In this episode.
Totally.
Don't you agree? I mean,
totally.
I guess the person I would feel like is closest to herself is Scully.
Yeah.
She's the one that holds it together the most. But the lone gunmen, I guess I could see them getting excited about video games. They're excited about Dungeons and Dragons, and it seems like they would know about the culture and be involved in it. They're going to be the ones that are going to the gaming tournaments and all of that. But they're just so overboard, and they're using this lingo that, I mean, tossing around these words like, I mean, cyber trash and cyber thugs and all these things. And I mean, I know that was the developer guy saying all that, but they just... It's like this whole other side of the lone gunman that we've never seen before and has never been hinted at, because usually they're talking about conspiracies and it just doesn't hit right at all. So it's really hard to get into.
I found them really, really difficult in this, in that they are obviously three of the best characters in this entire show. There is no getting, you know, we love the lone gun. Everyone loves the lone gunman. But this was just really painful at times with them. They were so badly written. Like, they were awfully cheesy. They were, like you say, they were out of character. They were coming out with some awful one-liners.
Oh, my God. There's one moment where Langley says... And it's when they're watching the game, and he's like, "The bloodthirst is unquenchable," and I'm thinking, "Oh my God, this is possibly the worst moment in the entire X-Files." You know what I mean?
This whole episode
Terrible.
Sounds and reads and watches like Langley is the one who wrote it. Like, if Langley wrote a television episode, I feel like this would be it.
Yeah.
Like, this is what he would think that people would want to see, or something.
In the defense of it, though, could we look at this through the prism of when these guys go into an environment that is expressly designed to cater to their most nerdy, but, you know, macho sort of fantasies, that they would descend into this gaggle of excited man children who are, over the moon when, the world famous Daryl Musashi comes in, and that they buy into this really facile culture of, that video games and getting your yayas out and all this kind of thing is what everybody wants to pay for, to do, and at the same time objectify women in the same vein, and that, we'll talk about this later, but you could read Maitreya as almost a cautionary tale in that sense, a punishment for this sort of machismo in what she does. That's to come, I think, for a bit later in the conversation. But ultimately, could they be excused for being outside of their normal world in the Lone Gunmen, doing what they normally do, and they've just completely bought into this culture, and that's turned them into these annoying nerd boys? I don't know.
I think on some level it's fairly likely that is what we're supposed to take away from it here, because later on Scully says, why does this game have the effect of reducing grown men to moony adolescents? So I feel like the episode is trying to make that link between gaming and this kind of reductive hyper-masculinity, and I think the episode is doing that in various ways. I think my problem is it doesn't really work either to do with a lone gunman or just in general, because they're coming at it from some kind of faulty premises, I think. So, for instance, when Scully's talking about the fact that this is, stupid games or whatever, and Mulder doesn't agree with her, but he sort of accepts what she's saying, and he sort of engages with it on the terms of maybe this violence is a way of channeling, feelings that we can't, things we can't do in the real world.
Doesn't he call her sexist?
He does call her sexist. Well. He does call her out. Yeah. So there's that conversation is slightly interesting, but I'm thinking, even at the time, this kind of thing wasn't all computer games. It's good that he picks her up on her sexism, because she equates enjoyment of video games with being masculine, or she talks about testosterone, doesn't she? Again, there are lots of gamers who are women, or whatever. They would just never get beyond the surface level examination of it, is my point. And I'm finding this happens a fair bit in season 7. I think I'm on an upcoming episode where I mentioned this, that the kind of detailed, interesting conversations Mulder and Scully normally have, we're not getting as much of anymore. It feels very much first draft stuff here. And I think if, when the series is really motoring, there'd be some good stuff here about all the various ramifications of gaming culture. And it just never gets beyond, the most basic, crude point you could possibly make, is what I mean.
Hey everyone, this is Tony, Network Chief of We Made This. As you know, our podcast network brings together a brilliant assortment of talent who talk about all kinds of pop culture content, such as the episode you've just listened to, or you're just about to listen to. We'd love to keep the lights on a bit longer if you're able to support our network on Patreon. For just £2 a month, you get your name in lights on the website and the satisfaction of knowing you're helping us produce more great audio. And for £3 a month, you'll get your name in lights, but you'll also get access to an exclusive bi-monthly podcast from the We Made This talent pool on podcasting, pop culture, and you tell us. We'll take your suggestions. For less than the price of a coffee per month, you can help keep We Made This going. So just head to patreon.com/We Made This. That's patreon.com/We Made This to get the ball rolling. Now, back to your scheduled programming.
I think it's interesting that in an episode filled with toxic masculinity and all this machismo and all this stuff, that Scully's the one who gets called sexist out of everybody, straight up. And I mean,
well, no, I think the men are sexist too, just to be clear.
Yeah.
Well, but they don't get called that, they don't, Mulder straight up says, hey, aren't you being sexist right now, and nobody else says that to the dudes.
Are we supposed to think that's easy to just read though? I mean, I'm not defending that, because I think there should be in the dialogue some level of that this is sexist. I mean, the big moment is the bit with Jay Blue Afterglow, where they're all perving on her. And they're all going,
I mean, I think it's very clear. It is, but
I don't know if it is clear enough, because I've been listening to the... Sorry, Sarah, go ahead. Sorry.
It's okay. No, I'm done.
In the Chris Carter commentary, it's actually quite leery. I found on the DVD, on the Blu-ray.
Really?
Because whenever Krista Allen is mentioned or she comes on the screen, he's making all these kind of remarks about how, oh yeah, the guys on the set were really focused on their job on this day when she came in to test her costume.
No, really?
Kind of thing. Yeah.
Oh God.
So there's not as much awareness that, and again, it's the commentary was recorded many years ago, I assume. Yeah, I think the problem is that Mulder kind of participates in it, in all that stuff, isn't it? First of all, I don't really buy that all the police officers would be acting in quite this way. It's so cartoonish. But at least if he's kind of stood aside from that, you could say, well, maybe it's kind of commentary on it. But I think the fact that Mulder is kind of implicated in it, so he puts his fist in his mouth, doesn't he, in that gesture? He almost falls off his chair looking at her later. Now, I buy completely that he would find this woman attractive, you know. I think that's fair enough. But I don't think he would abandon all level of professional decorum in the way that he does in this episode, you know.
Well, I was going to ask you guys about this, because I was going to say, where does Mulder fall here? Because on some level, he also buys into this culture. He knows about Daryl Musashi. He knows. He says at one point when Phoebe's constructing the image in the game, he says, "Can you texture wrap her?" You know, he knows the lingo. He knows the terminology. He understands this world. We could potentially infer that he too games. I mean, I wouldn't surprise me if it being Mulder. We never see him do it, but it wouldn't surprise me that he's interested in this kind of thing. But at the same time, I kind of almost wondered if he was being intentionally mocking in that scene with the cops, where he does the fist. Like part of him likes the idea of being one of the lads, but then when they're looking in, he draws the blinds so they can't see them in there, and then. I don't know. I feel like is there a level of Mulder that he's self-aware enough to know that this is all a bit toxic, and that he's not completely gone down that rabbit hole, but there is a part of him that, you know, maybe the part where he leers after Jade's arse, you know, and which is meant to be a funny beat. It's meant to be a comic beat. There might also be a little plinky plonky on the soundtrack at that point. We're meant to laugh at that, but is there a balance with Mulder here? Is he a bit of both?
I thought that the Daryl Musashi quote was more sarcastic. I felt like he was teasing. That's the impression I got. That he was like, right. But it's this guy. And he was kind of like poking fun at the other people and how excited they were.
Yeah. Could have been,
So I feel like they were trying. I don't feel they were very successful at portraying Mulder that way. It fell flat.
Yeah. I don't think it reads clearly enough if it is what you're kind of speculating about, Tony. I think they needed to signal it a bit clearer. And I think it's worth noting that on the commentary track, Chris Carter does say that David Duchovny initially didn't agree that Mulder would act that way in the police station. He felt it was un-Mulder-like, but apparently they had some kind of conversation. It's interesting to speculate what that conversation would have been like, considering they're both still embroiled in that lawsuit at this time. But anyway, eventually he did the scene or whatever.
Speaking of Musashi, just quickly as well, is there not some level of cliche there as well?
Yeah.
In that they pour in this, you know, very sort of intense, humorless Japanese guy. The assumption being that Asian men of this kind of era, of that kind of age, are so humorless and focused on their video gaming. That's all they know, and they are, you know. I just felt like that was really that was such a lazy cliche.
And I was wondering as well if he was meant to be, because he's meant to be this hotshot designer, isn't he? So is he meant to be a kind of Hideo Kojima or Shigeru Miyamoto, you know, these big name figures who were making all these games at the time? But it doesn't really read across because, you know, you might as well put a soldier in that game, mightn't you? It doesn't really require gaming skills as such. It just requires somebody who's good with a gun, basically. So why aren't they bringing in, like, you know, some, like, I don't know, what's the equivalent of the SAS in America, Sarah? Do you know what I mean? They need some kind of special
Navy SEALs.
You know, that's what they need. They don't need someone who's like a really good gamer, necessarily coder. Yeah, you know what I mean? I think it is cliched. Yeah, and he obviously gets his hands cut off fairly quickly. So I'll back on the Mulder thing. I just didn't think it really satisfied me, and maybe there's a broader conversation there. Is because somebody mentioned earlier the phrase "out of character," and like. I understand that. I was sort of wary of that in some ways. I remember seeing an interview with David Duchovny like years and years ago. He was saying like he didn't agree with the idea of being out of character. And I think the example he used was, you know, if a script came across to him and it said Mulder wears a dress, and, you know, you might say that's out of character. Mulder doesn't wear dresses. But he would have to find a way as an actor to kind of reconcile these contradictions and make what's on the page come to life. And, you could say first-person shooter, it's a terrible episode. It's just as much a part of the X-Files' history as any other episode, really. I feel like if they'd have found a way to make this more obviously an off-format episode, maybe you could buy the characters not being quite what we're accustomed to. I still think it would have been a problem with some of the specifics here, but it's that weird tonal thing for me. It's not quite an experiment in the way that Triangle or something is.
No.
Which could mean you can maybe get past that.
If we're talking about parodies and satire, I feel like Postmodern Prometheus is a good comparison, because that was successful, and Mulder and Scully felt more like themselves in that episode and more, true to character. And it actually worked, because even though all of the characters were literally caricatures of animals, it was more successful than this. And I wonder if, I keep thinking of the film Hackers. And while they were hackers, that's still a similar culture. And it's so subversive. And I feel like gaming itself is so subversive because, while, yes, gamers now do have these big corporate sponsors and there's a lot of money, like billions of dollars in the gaming industry. It's huge. But it still seems like a lot of gamers are more into the subversive culture and sticking it to, capitalism and all of that, and just in their own kind of a way. And this is not that. Like, it just doesn't work.
Well, gamers nowadays, they can become their own industry, can't they?
Yeah.
They can make millions, on YouTube. And quite a lot of these got people, particularly mostly men, isn't it, really? But a lot of these people are morally questionable sometimes, I think, in what they do. But you've got reports of like 16-year-olds making like $1 million off YouTube subscriptions for gaming and all that kind of thing. So it's crazy now where it's gone. And this was kind of, you've got that absolute arsehole of a character, the guy who's basically created the game.
Oh, Ivan.
Ivan, yeah, and he again is a real cliche of that world. All he cares about is the money. He's not bothered people are dying. You've seen that character in a dozen different things over the years, in various different kinds of stories. They're still telling stories of that character now. Most recently, a good example of that, I think, was in Ready Player One, the character that Ben Mendelsohn plays. That's essentially the same kind of character, So I think that, in fact, that film in some ways is an ultimate extension of this kind of idea. Really, the corporate, mining of, people's experiences for game, and that's why I think the most interesting aspect of this episode is potentially, like I sort of said earlier, potentially what Maitreya could represent if it was done better, and it was maybe, well, let's be honest, maybe if this had a female input into the script, you might have had more nuance here, and it might have actually come out better. But what Maitreya could, in theory, represent as being a kind of, if not sexual punishment, a moral punishment of these kind of men who will happily exploit women for this kind of, on an audience level, this kind of satisfaction, and on a corporate level, this kind of exploitation of money. When you meet Jade, they find out obviously that she was asked to scan her body by a company. And then she makes the joke of, do you think that's the strangest thing I've been asked to do for money? But it again, I think that they're trying with her on the one hand to sort of, because what always strikes me about her, the Jade character, is how unhappy she seems in that scene. Is how maybe it's because she's been questioned for ages, but it feels like she doesn't appreciate the objectification that she gets from every single man in there. And I don't know what you think, Sarah, particularly about this, both of you, but I feel like it feels like what they're trying to do is suggest that the exploitation of women like Jade is a part of the bigger problem. But at the same time, then you have the leering, then you have the shots that show her arse off, then you've got the Basic Instinct rip-off, which is all just buying into that culture again in it as well, without any of the irony, without any of the satire. What do you guys think?
I mean, I guess that's what feels incongruent to me about how Phoebe portrays her, Maitreya in the video game, because it feels to me like if she wants to break out of all of that, it just doesn't make sense to me why she would make her that way and why she would feed into that while also at the same, I don't know. It just doesn't sit right with me. But I mean, they did say that Jade Blue Afterglow got her Miranda rights read 500 times. Like everybody,
It's like I've said, they go for the obvious, they go for the most egregious example of things continually through the episode, where, you could have done something like that, which was a lot more subtle, just one reference to something, In terms of the women, Phoebe, so she talks about how Maitreya was everything that she could never be, doesn't she? So you got this suggestion that you got this masculinized effect of a cultural form like video games that has this warping effect on the people who consume these images and potentially the people who work in these industries, these hyper-masculine industries. That's an interesting idea to explore, and I think a couple of people in the mailbag have said they found that interesting. The problem for me is the episode does it in a very crass, annoying way, and in a way that kind of neuters Phoebe as a character. And I think it comes across as really glaringly bad because, like, Scully, by contrast, has been a much more interesting character that the series has found a way to sort of interrogate these masculine power structures with. If you think about an episode like Soft Light, which is not the greatest episode in the world, but the stuff you've got in there where she's trying to help out that agent, the woman agent that she used to teach and things, is much more subtle than this, for instance. So, yeah, it doesn't really scan, and I think the fact that it doesn't really make sense as well, because it seems like there are only two people working in this company. Well, there's a security guard as well. I suppose there are three, 2 men and 1 woman.
That's true.
So quite why she feels that way doesn't really, I mean, it comes across through the way the people are acting in the game. But if this had been like a bigger company potentially, where you had, she's the one woman amongst like 50 designers or 50 other workers, maybe that point would have been made a bit more fruitfully. It's just a bit confused as it is, I think. And it also, if it was going to be a really good critique of male masculine hyperviolence, it would have been fun then if Scully goes into the game and like completes it by problem solving or something, instead of just standing there blasting the crap out of these characters, So it's sort of, the episode seems to forsake these opportunities to me to actually really do something kind of intriguing with the concept.
Yeah, it feels like Phoebe's a missed opportunity in many ways. It feels like they could have utilised her in a better way. I never really understood what... I mean, maybe it's because she's lived in this world too much, but she herself almost feels a bit like a bit of a cliche.
Yeah. In
that she's the nice...
The plain,
plain young girl who is working in this industry and then wants to... If anything, she wants to become the objectified woman that these boys, these men want to leer over. And I mean, it would not be written like this today. I mean, no way would that be seen as any kind of a level of empowerment at all. I don't think. Well, in wanting to buy in. Well, I don't think it would be. But I mean, I might be wrong. I'm a man at the end of the day. Feel free to correct me on this, Sarah. But it feels like it's quite retrograde for her to want to be Maitreya. Yeah. In many ways.
Well, that's what I feel doesn't sit right because, it just feels like she's trying to embody this character that she created. And instead, shouldn't she... I don't know. None of it makes sense this whole episode.
If it had come across more clearly that Maitreya has come into being as like the ultimate expression of masculine, or a masculine idea of this kind of reduced femininity or something, or this excessive femininity, that could have been interesting. It's just very limited in the way it explores that. Like when you have Scully saying lines like, "No fair picking on a girl."
I hate that line.
Yeah.
Hate that line.
I think there probably are people who enjoy that and like enjoy her standing up for Phoebe in that moment. I find it cringeworthy. I've got to be honest.
Yeah. It's not the standing up for her, it's the line itself.
Yeah.
It's just the kind of line that a man would write without you know what I mean? And I don't think that.
It's not even that though, because there are so many men who could have written much better lines than this, And there are probably awful women writers as well who would have made this episode terrible. It's that it's just, I don't think it's that essentially about the gender. It's the fact that it's just really, really crap, basically.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Can we talk about this game as well? Like, what the hell is going on with this game? So level 1 is like this street at night with the tall buildings either side. Level 2 is the Wild West with a tank. Like, what is the structure here? What is going on? I don't understand it.
Yeah. I don't understand how she can be awake for 70 hours trying to design this game and make it work, and there's only 2 levels. It's so intense that nobody's gotten past level 2. Like, how many levels are there in this game?
In fairness, it seems like a rock-hard game because immediately Matreya's on a tank. It's like... okay. like
where's the challenge? Where's the fun in this?
Well,
There's no strategy to it at all.
Did you guys not feel as well that Matreya straddling a tank with a big thrusting cannon was quite a pointed, like
the ultimate phallic
attempt at sexual imagery? Because I did. I was a bit, okay, all right. By that point, I'd really lost interest. But when they're both in there with the guns and they're just firing at all this, because it almost flicks, doesn't it? In that the focus of the people trying to sort the problem are then Phoebe and the lone gunman. Yeah. They're the ones doing all of that outside. And all you've got Mulder and Scully really doing is blasting the crap out of stuff.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was like, well, this doesn't feel right to me. I get that the idea is that you put David and Gillian in these costumes and they become part of this game. Oh, and one other thing, how the hell does Mulder disappear from that room?
Yeah.
Like, how does that happen? I have no idea how that is possible.
It's an X-File, Tony.
Even for an X-File, Sarah. No way. No way. That is bullshit of the highest order.
It's what Chris Carter says in the commentary, is he says that the tone keeps shifting between believable and unbelievable. And there are moments like that which really kind of don't make sense and test the patience, aren't there?
His body should have been there, even if his consciousness was in the game at that point. His body shouldn't have gone anywhere. And I was like, what the hell is this? There's no internal logic to it in any way. And also on a purely basic level, I can accept this when it's a 23rd century starship. But when it's a big room, right, how the hell are they running down passages, going underground into different levels, when the room is basically not much bigger than a very small warehouse?
Yeah.
Like, I don't understand the physics of it, because even if you're in a virtual reality environment, you can only run so far in that room before you'll hit the wall. I don't understand how it works on a basic functional logical level. And I think those are part of the problems, in that I kept all the way. And I don't often do this, with storytelling. I can forgive a lot of stuff when it's genre TV.
Yeah.
But I was constantly in this episode going, well, how does that work? That doesn't make any sense. Even for an X-File, this makes no sense. That was a big problem for me.
Definitely.
That's saying a lot. I mean, at least Fight Club makes sense.
It is for this show. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just the whole final sequence where it's like, the stuff with the gunman is really stupid. The fact that her password that shuts down the game is Shift-Alt-Bloodbath. Oh my God. Mulder, when he's like, that's entertainment, when he gets out of the game. I've actually written on my notes here. I normally write quite, analytical notes, but I've written Mulder, shut the fuck up on my pages. I really hate the right stuff style slow-mo they put over, when he's giving the voiceover at the end.
And that voiceover's rubbish as well. Like, that voiceover, I was listening to it going, what on earth is he talking about here? This was, I just thought it was a load of rubbish. The final act was terrible, like really, really bad. Really bad.
Did you guys like Scully's video game avatar that we see at the end? Because Chris Carter on the commentaries said he was never quite happy that it looked enough like Scully, but this was a late episode apparently. The effects weren't finished until less than a day before it aired, which is like really down to the wire, obviously. Yeah, Sarah, did you like that moment where we see Scully?
Yeah. Again, I don't mean to keep harping on like the clothes and stuff.
No, it's a fair point. I think it's a fair point. Go for it.
Yeah, I would have rather have seen her like in the badass uniform that she was wearing, like when she was with like the gear and all of that, that seemed more realistic to me than putting her in a thong and a bunch of strappy leather stuff. But I don't think it actually even looked like her at all either. So,
And you have,
but
Ivan
just
chuckling as well.
To take an FBI, I mean, and that's what's so frustrating. She's this FBI agent. Scully, as a character, is supposed to be embodying, the Scully effect and science and doing all this stuff, and then just to go slap her into this video game like she's some goddess or something, and it's just completely the antithesis of everything that Scully is. And Scully herself is a goddess, it's really aggravating.
Is that part of the point, though? Because ultimately, when you were talking earlier about Phoebe and everything you were saying, I kept thinking, well, really, Phoebe should be aspiring to be Scully, not Maitreya, right?
Yes,
and
exactly.
maybe the point of the end, because Ivan is a skeevy, money-grabbing character, and maybe the point at the end is that is the whole point, in that we know that Scully is the goddess, essentially, and we should be aspiring towards her, but you still will have these corporate entities and these, skeevy guys just caring about Franklins who will objectify women, and it carries on. I think that's what it's trying to do.
But it's kind of played as a happy ending, isn't it? Because we've got Mark Snow's kind of quite lilting score over that, which kind of
what's that about?
Undercuts that possible reading that you just mentioned. It seems,
and it's never clear either. Phoebe never gets the chance. That could have been so many great things that Scully and Phoebe could have talked about and
spin-off
dug into and all of this stuff. And instead
where's
they just
Ivan's comeuppance?
completely drop the ball.
Where's that? It doesn't happen, really, does it? The only thing that happens is that the game, I suppose it was that the game gets wiped of that iteration. But yeah, he gets the happy ending because he's going to profit, presumably, off Scully's image.
And Phoebe did all the work, apparently.
Yeah.
With all of her 70 hours a week in programming.
Yeah. It's not good. It's a really... The chance to sort of crystallise what that could be saying is absolutely missed. Yeah, completely.
So I do have a question. If Phoebe is the one who created Maitreya, and Jade Blue Afterglow sold her body image to this company, did Phoebe specifically choose her somehow, or did she just sell it and then she went to this company and this company is like, we have all these body scans of different people and you can buy them? How did that business go down? I'm curious about that.
Sarah, I'm gonna have to give you a yellow card for trying to apply logic to this episode. don't make me give you a red card, Sarah. No, I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. So, Tony, do you have an idea?
Maybe the latter, that they had a bank of them and she just picked the one she fancied the most. I don't know. That's the biggest X-File maybe of all of them. All of the X-Files within this X-File.
Don't forget that Langley had done some of the programming for this company, is what they say, didn't they, at the outset? He had designed some of the villains or something, they say. Some of the Euro goons. So,
that we never see.
Yeah.
Aren't they firing? Aren't they're like Nazis at the beginning as well, like firing on them or somebody? Did I missee that? Because there was the guys
weren't
on
they
on
rafters, bikes or something?
Well, there was the guys on bikes, but then there were guys on rafters firing down
up from above.
People.
Yeah.
Were they Nazis, or did I completely misread that? Because they looked like they had Nazi hats on.
I didn't pick up on that, to be honest. I'm not sure.
No. Maybe I'm just...
No, they might be.
Nazis.
I might just have... Because it was quite a quick-cutting thing, wasn't it? I'm not sure I lingered on it, on the images enough.
I don't know. Eagle-Eye viewers, we're not going to watch this episode again, so it's up to you guys to tell us.
Yeah. We've done our part. We've paid our price.
Yeah, maybe a couple more notes from the commentary, Sarah, if you don't mind, before we go into the mailbag.
Go for it.
Rob Bowman directed some shots of the episode, some aspects of the teaser.
Oh.
The video game stuff, they found that they could get a lot more of the violence past standards and practices than they maybe expected. Chris Carter did say that the longer the show went on, the less trouble they had with the censors. So I thought that was kind of interesting. There was some trickery with those motorbikes at the beginning. So, in some shots, it's filmed quite cleverly so that you don't see all the bikes, But there were that many motorbikes there. So it sounded like it was a pretty involved... It's kind of like Tony was saying, it's a very expensive episode. I believe it was actually nominated for a couple of Emmys for technical stuff. But it also sounds like a bit of a... Because Carter talks about at certain points that some scenes took them a long time, so they meant that the following scene that they shot was rushed and that kind of thing. Yeah, that's about all I have, to be honest.
Considering the time it took and the money it cost, it looked really crap. Like, it really does. Like, even by the standards of today, where this technology has improved, it's rubbish. I mean, there's stuff from, like, the mid-90s that looks better than this on television.
Yeah.
You know? So, yeah, I don't know where that money went. Up in smoke, I think. It's interesting about the sensors, though. Is that an indication of how times were starting to change as the X-Files progressed? You know?
Yeah, it could be that, couldn't it? Yeah.
Well, this is only 4 years after they said we will never ever see the Peacock family on screen again, you know, and they banned them forever after Home. And you know, it's like, wow, have they got to a point now where they're really starting to shift away from that?
Maybe the culture's changing. Maybe it's that, you know, the X-Files, they just felt at this point it was a long-running show. It was a safer pair of hands. They know this creative team are not that exploitative. Although the irony is that this is quite a, you know, an episode that does kind of exploit things.
I mean, also, it just wasn't very good. Like, the graphics, they're not shooting actual, technically, they're shooting holograph. So I feel like that, I mean, if they were blowing real people away, and it was more realistic, I feel like maybe they would have had some pushback, but I think when he's talking about stuff like Daryl Musashi as well, having the hands cut off and being surprised they could do that in the kind of detail they did. Yeah, that makes sense.
None of the violence really...
He rolls in with his head between his feet, like that's... At least put it up at the top there, you know.
I was going to say, I thought that. There was something quite morbidly funny about that. The late, great Daryl Musashi. It's like he's taking the piss and he's put the head there just for effect.
Terrible.
This will make Scully laugh. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Could this... Okay, I've got one last question, right? Could this episode have been improved by this slight script tweak? Mulder and Scully are in there, they're shooting, it's all about to go wrong. Suddenly, Ferreri gets on the phone and we cut to the door opening and in full costume with a massive broadsword and a gun is one assistant director, Walter Skinner.
Yes. Every episode is improved with Walter Skinner.
With the shades.
Yeah.
As well.
That's a fanfic.
I actually think, I think that would be fun. I think with Skinner... I was thinking that maybe if he had given them this case, that could have been... You could have put the kind of stupid video game stuff in Skinner's mouth. It might have made more sense coming from him than from Scully, I think. Because I feel like Scully might have been able to say something about like the cognitive effects of solving puzzles. Or, do you know what I mean? She could have had a different way to come at it. But it would have been fun to see like Skinner throwing this file across their desk and being like really dismissive. You know?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Anyways, I guess we should probably go to the mailbag now, right?
Right.
Let's do it.
All right, so we have a comment from Kara McKenna. She says, this may not technically be the worst episode of the series, but as a woman who also happens to be a game developer, it's the one that makes me the angriest. And maybe I could have forgiven some of the pseudo-feminism and game developing cringe if the characterizations of Scully and especially Mulder weren't so completely off the mark, just to be shoehorned into this unimaginative and stereotypical narrative. I feel like that sums up kind of everything we said, right?
Yeah, I think Mulder and Scully being not interesting or compelling here is the biggest problem, because you can forgive a lot when those two are on song, I think.
Yeah,
so
shoehorned is a great word.
Good point.
Yeah.
I wanted to read a couple of comments. The first one, which really made me laugh, was from Stephen Lovins, who said, "It's trash, but the sort of trash I occasionally crave if I hate myself. It's like McDonald's left too long in the warmer. If I happen to have an abundance of self-respect on the given day, I wouldn't consume. But sometimes, drunk at 2 a.m., I might shove it in my face."
I think he's won there. I think he's won the comments of all time. Actually.
I can see that. I've never watched this episode drunk at 2 in the morning, but, you know, maybe we should do that next time, Sarah. We can do, you know, with the time zones, it might line up. I also wanted to read Liam Shane Coughlin's message. So he says, it's a victory of style over substance. First-person shooter acts as an indulgence exercise for Chris Carter, allowing him to lend his own contribution to the martial arts cyberpunk oeuvre contemporaneous with the millennium. That Gibson is involved suggests that unlike the startling and wildly original kill switch, his contribution may have been somewhat dialed back by Carter on this occasion. Whilst this episode is a memorable exercise in stylistic divergence with strong iconography and some humdinger act breaks, ultimately the uneven tonal nature of the piece and perhaps the marriage of its two creative influences proves its undoing. Never anything less than a bold experiment, the episode showcases the vivacious auteur groove that the 7th season mines in its concluding half. Concepts and developments perhaps considered to be too tangential prior to this time in the show's history are at this point in its lifespan encouraged and explored. Entertaining but not essential, with the frustrating components of what may have been. So yeah, always good to hear from Liam. I just don't like the style that he finds entertaining here is my problem. So I can't sort of go along with him on this occasion. But a good message as ever.
Yeah, I'll read it. I'll read one or two. So Heather Ben says, this episode is bad in a way I like. It makes me laugh. I think it has to do with the fact that I used to be in the Navy back in the day. Video games were a popular way for the guys to unwind. I also know plenty about what it's like to be one of few females. I like that Scully gets to save Mulder from himself again, and that my dudes, the lone gunmen, are in it. Again, so another female perspective there. Her and Karen both have the perspective of people who have either worked in a similar sort of industry or been in an environment with the kind of audience that this would be receiving this. You know, guys, testosterone filled. Well, the cliched idea of the audience for this anyway. The testosterone filled guys, I guess. That's interesting. That's interesting takes.
Yeah.
In these kind of approaches, really.
The thing is, I was a keen gamer back in 2000, so I don't recognise any of this portrayal though in myself in terms of, you know, those guys who are at the start saying, gonna kill. I was like playing like Escape from Monkey Island and like solving puzzles and stuff. Do you know what I mean? I was playing shooting games. I was playing puzzle games. Do you know what I mean? It's such a more diverse field than this episode kind of indicates. And I know it can't possibly represent all types of video games, but it's very cliched.
Well, when we were young, I mean, sports games were as massive as they are today. You know, it's football games. I was playing a hell of a lot as well. So it's not necessarily. It's a certain subgenre of fan. This is commenting on. You know, I guess subculture of fan.
But which kind of is being held up as indicative of fans more generally, isn't it? Or gamers more generally. Yeah.
Yeah, and that can be the issue. Yeah, and I'll read Andrew Levitt's comment, which is, after the excellent kill switch, first-person shooter is a big letdown. The concept is fantastic, and it worked for the first two acts. However, once Mulder enters the digital world, it just gets silly and uses some cheap CG that makes everything look bad. I like that the writers are trying to address the issue of female gamers being sidelined for the machismo of male gamers, something that's still prevalent over 20 years later. But Carter's handling of the issue, especially the Jay Blue Afterglow character, is cringeworthy. It's nice to see Scully save Mulder from his own macho hedonism and for the gunman to get all geeky about the game. The second unique direction from Rob Bowman is fantastic, and I can't help but wonder what the episode would have been like if he had taken on the director's role for the whole episode. Being the nerdy gamer I am, I can't help but have a soft spot for William Gibson and Tom Maddox's second X-Files episode. But it definitely has issues, such as an underdeveloped script and Carter's questionable direction that bring it well down in my rankings. It's average at best. Mm-hmm. We've covered a lot of that, what he says. I think we're probably in agreement, and that's probably a fair, just overall assumption, isn't it? It's average to below average, this one, I reckon.
Well below average. Mm-hmm. Well below.
Yeah. Well, we've got Nicole Wilson-Ripsom, I feel like, has a good one to wrap things up. She says, I have always really enjoyed this episode. It's got the gunman, which is almost enough all by itself. Cinematically, there are parts of it that are quite good, and other parts, the CGI mainly, that just aren't up to par. While Phoebe's line to Scully, that she doesn't know what it's like to be the only female, makes me cringe every time, it's because it reflects a cringeworthy reality. Many women in highly male-dominated fields are simply not aware of the same phenomenon in other fields. About 15 years ago, I produced a conference for women in the Bay Area that dealt with that very topic, raising awareness amongst females of the lack of female representation in so many different fields, many that people, especially other women, don't automatically think of. The other thing that I always liked about this episode is that it gives us what I've always appreciated as a different look at Mulder. Over the years, they've hinted that he's at least a bit of a gamer, especially when he's with the gunman, and this episode lets him embrace it full on, which I love. We know from his subscriptions that Mulder has an eye for overly voluptuous women, so his reaction to seeing Jade Blue in the flesh didn't surprise me, and was something that made him more human, more fallible, for lack of a better word, to me. And while I wish that she was less of a stick in the mud about it, I do love that Scully is the one that gets to be the badass in the game and save the day. All in all, a fun romp, interesting character study, and mostly visually appealing.
I mean, she has an interesting take. It's a shame. It's nice to hear a more positive take on the female representation in this episode. I think it's a shame it didn't happen in an episode that was even passably acceptable. I was trying to work out what she's saying when she says that over the years they've hinted that Mulder's a bit of a gamer. I can't think of anything that really points to that, but I'd love to hear the specifics on that. I never really thought of the gunmen that way either. Like, Frohickey doesn't seem like a archetypal gamer to me. Maybe Langley.
Well, Frohickey's a bit old.
But they all could be. I mean,
isn't he?
Gamers can look like anything, but I've never really got that impression, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I don't think it made Mulder more human. I think it made him more cartoonish, the way he reacts to Jade Blue Afterglow. But this is what I'm saying. I think there's definitely a fan base for this episode out there. So,
a fan base of one?
No. I think there was another one, wasn't there? I don't know.
There might have been. Yeah. No,
well, Ellie
cool.
Jean, I know
take.
it's not a good episode, but I like it. Yeah. So there you go.
Ellie,
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
There we go. That's about all we've got to say about that, guys.
I think we've unpacked this really well, though.
Yeah,
there's like, it could easily be an episode that people would just think, there's nothing to talk about there, it's rubbish. There's loads to talk about with this.
Yeah.
It's fascinatingly bad, really.
It's fascinatingly something. Yeah, so I guess that about wraps it up. Tony, where can we find you online? What are you up to these days? It's been a minute.
Yeah, I mean, like, loads and loads of different stuff, really. The best places to get me is generally on the We Made This network at WMT_network. My personal Twitter, AJ Blackwriter. On my website, thetruthisinhere.co.uk, blatant X-Files ripoff. So, yeah, you'll find everything I'm up to on there. And I look forward to doing this again with you guys. I think we're talking about reuniting for Roadrunners in Season 8, aren't we?
Yes.
Which will be a much better and a very different episode, and one I'm fascinated to see you watch, Sarah, and engage with, because I can't wait for you in Season 8. That's going to be such great listening, but we'll see.
Yeah. Carl, how about you? Where can we find you online? What are you up to?
Mainly, I would say on Twitter, at CKJ Sweeney. I'm also... I think all of us chip in on the X-Cast Twitter account. Sarah and I run the Instagram account, so that's occasionally me as well. I'm quite active in the Basement group on Facebook. In terms of my other film podcast, at Movie Palace Pod, the Movie Palace, it's mainly about classic films from decades ago, so that's going too. Those are the main places. And, cheers, guys. Enjoyed this one today.
Yeah, it's good times. Good times. And as always, you can find me on Twitter at Sarah L. Blair and on Instagram at author.sarah.blair and the X-Cast at the X-Cast Pod on Instagram and on Twitter, the X_cast on Twitter. And on our Facebook Basement group and our Patreon. We've got some fun stuff going on the Patreon. Commentaries, in-depth roundtables, lots of fun stuff is going on.
Yeah, you guys are doing a Hollywood AD commentary soon, aren't you, as well? Which will be fun.
Yeah,
that's the plan.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
So,
should have done this one as a commentary, shouldn't we? We missed the trick there.
Yeah. It'd just be us being like, "Oh, this is terrible!" Like
Banging
the whole
our heads
time.
against
Just,
the table
why?
for 45 minutes.
We just need to be drunk, as we said earlier,
worst,
and then it'll be fine. Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. All right. As always, thanks for listening, everyone. We appreciate you. And until next time, trust no one.
Elsewhere on We Made This. Podcast 616, a Marvel Universe podcast.
I definitely noticed that they weren't the actual voice actors. It didn't bother me. It didn't feel strange or anything. I mean, we as viewers have become so accustomed to seeing, Chris Pratt as Star-Lord, or Chadwick Boseman as T'Challa, or Dave Bautista as Drax, that in these instances, when we hear their voices and they don't necessarily match, it's like, oh, wait a second, that's not the right person. But stepping outside of it for a moment, these are comic book characters. We're introducing the multiverse, right? And now we are introducing all of these tangents of stories that can go in any different kind of direction. So they don't need to be the same actor. They don't need to be the same voice one-to-one, in my mind. And as a fan, I can accept this. I'm okay with that.
The Movie Palace Podcast.
Yeah, is Truffaut somebody you found yourself drawn to over the years? Have you watched like a lot of his films?
So, just in terms of like French New Wave, I think I've seen more Jean-Luc Godard than I've seen Francois Truffaut. But I really do love Francois Truffaut. I love his attention to realism and to small aspects of people's lives. And I love his stories and how character-driven they are. I've seen like Shoot the Piano Player, Jules and Jim, which isn't one of my favorites, but I'm trying to appreciate it more.
Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast.
Craig Charles looks f***ing cool as Sebastian Doyle. I'd love to look that cool. Oh, bad.
Craig Charles tends to look cool all of the time, though.
Well, true, but he looks more sophisticated cool than Rock-a-Dude with a band cool. And I'm getting old, I want to look sophisticated cool rather than Rock-a-Dude cool.
Craig Charles had apparently said that, you know, it was great to be able to play this version of Lister because that's more like me. Always being the cool guy. Which I thought was great.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network. The X-Cast and X-Files podcast was created by Tony Black and is produced and hosted by Carl Sweeney, Sarah Blair and Kurt North.
You can find the podcast on Twitter at the X_cast, on Facebook by typing in the X-Cast, and in our group, X-Files Basement, the X-Cast podcast fan group, and on Instagram at the X-Cast pod.
Don't forget, you can support the show by becoming a member on Patreon. Our patrons get early access to episodes, behind-the-scenes chats with our hosts and a thriving community of X-Files, and other premium interviews and specials. To find out more and subscribe, you can go to patreon.com/thexcast. That's patreon.com/thexcast.
We are also part of the We Made This podcast network, full of popular culture shows, including our Millennium series, The Time Is Now. You can find all of our shows at our website, wemadethispod.com, or via Twitter at wemadethispod.
Thanks for listening and keep watching the skies.